The Ray that I have beside me is Sonos' entry-level soundbar. It can be found for £279 in the UK and $279 in the US. In this review you can see if it's actually worth its price tag, be it if you are on Sonos' ecosystem or not, and furthermore how it compares to its major rivals. So to kick off this video I want to talk about its aesthetics, and subjectively I think it looks very attractive. It's available in both a black and white finish, and given its compact form factor it means it's not going to take up too much space on your cabinet. You can also wall mount it, although you will have to purchase a wall mount as an additional accessory. So moving swiftly on, it is worth considering this is an all-in-one soundbar, but of course it does integrate with Sonos' ecosystem and can also be upgraded, be it at the time of purchase or indeed further down in the line. You can purchase a subwoofer which comes in at a very chunky price of £750 or $750, which doesn't quite make sense with the Ray setup because the subwoofer is just too big and would be too much overpowering for what the Ray is currently offering. It is rumored, however, that Sonos is bringing a smaller subwoofer to the market, and that would make a lot more sense when pairing up with the Ray for those people who want a 2.1 channel configuration. Now you can go for a 4.1 or 4.0 channel configuration as well, because you can pair this up with the One or the One SL, and these are surround speakers, and this will of course give you a little bit of extra dynamism in a small or indeed larger sized room. Now, no matter if you're invested in Sonos' ecosystem or not, it is worth bearing in mind how you actually interact with the soundbar unit itself. Now here it has some touch-based input that I found at the top of the soundbar. I actually find them very responsive and among one of the best touch-based input soundbars that I've actually come across. However, I would have still preferred physical buttons because it prevents mistouch operation, be it from yourself, your kids, or let's say for example pets. Thankfully, Sonos have included an option to disable the touch-based input at the top of the soundbar via the app. Similarly over here, there's a small little LED indicator found towards the front of the soundbar, and if you do not want that to be permanently illuminated, then you can disable it. Now this does bring me onto its remote, because here there is none. There is no bundled remote, and that might take a lot of people, including myself, by surprise. As a result, it means that you're going to have to rely on a smartphone and or those touch-based inputs at the top of the soundbar. Now the reason I'm highlighting this is because I have a modern Samsung television, at least in my opinion, modern around 2018 built TV, and here it uses the Samsung One remote, which I often use rather than the rather traditional one. As a result here, it doesn't use an IR signal, and as such it meant that for me to use my remote with the soundbar and therefore adjust the volume from afar, I had to go through a somewhat, well, hit and miss setup guide that then had to pair the soundbar with the remote. Now this does not take too much time, but it does mean that it's a little bit counterintuitive for those people who just want to set up and go, and as such here the Ray seems just a little bit counterintuitive in comparison to other soundbars that I've previously reviewed. Now on that note as well, it is very important to highlight that this does not have any sort of HDMI inputs or outputs, and that again does take away from the overall functionalities or the just plug and play sort of feel of it. Now I think Sonos' excuse over here is the fact that they do not support any heightened metadata, for example Dolby Atmos or for example DTS:X. Now it's no surprise here because it does not have any upward or sideward firing drivers, and it's just a stereo soundbar configuration, but it would have meant that HDMI CEC would have been very much, well, taking away that stress of having to set up the remote over an optical input. Now aside from its HDMI omission, it is also worth bearing in mind that you do not have any Bluetooth either. Now this won't be of a concern for a lot of individuals who are going to be using the Sonos app, and therefore if you do want to play locally stored music, you can do so directly via the app, or indeed of course stream any of your certain services, and therefore means that you're not going to be limited to the Bluetooth codecs. Well, at least the codecs that most soundbars use over there is SBC and AAC, and as a result it's no competition to what Wi-Fi offers. And here in this case I had no inherent problems. However, if you're someone who is sociable, and for example if you have friends or family coming over and they want to quickly play back their tracks via your soundbar, then the omission of Bluetooth might be of a concern to you, and as a result you might want to look elsewhere. Now as the Ray has Wi-Fi support, it's also great to see that you've got an Ethernet port as well. You might want to use this if you've got a router nearby, because the soundbar will actually consume less power, and that is of course if you disable Wi-Fi altogether. Now, this does actually bring me into power draw. Now, this is not something I normally comment on in terms of soundbar reviews, but I thought to actually mention it in this soundbar Sonos review. And the reason behind that is because the Sonos soundbars, or indeed the ecosystem that you have, don't actually have an on and off button, at least not from the ones that I have seen. And as a result means that the Ray is constantly drawing power. Now here, in terms of its idle state, I was able to record 2.5 to 2.9 watts of power draw. When it was on and therefore music was playing, it was roughly 4.5 to 4.9 watts. Now, in comparison to my Samsung HW-N850, which was a 2018 or 2019 flagship soundbar from Samsung, when it was off, and therefore when I just had pressed the off button physically on the soundbar and left it for a little while, the power draw sat at around 4.5 watts constantly. As to when it was actually on, and bearing in mind this is not with the subwoofer because the subwoofer is an external and separate device, it was consuming roughly 8 to 9 watts of power. Ultimately, what I'm trying to highlight over here is in comparison to other connected soundbar systems out there on the market, the Ray doesn't actually consume that much power and should be a non-issue when it comes to your overall electricity bills. Now, moving on to the app, I do think it's one of the key selling points of any Sonos products, and here the Ray is no different. It's got a great user interface and one that's very friendly. Better still, you can browse a variety of different stations or indeed services, play back directly what's on your TV, or indeed even browse what's on your mobile device in terms of locally stored files. In my case, for example, I just searched pre-addressed track, and over here you can see it was previously playing. It provides a fantastic user experience, one that allows me to even browse these certain songs that has previously produced, or go on, let's say, crossfade or the sleep timer, which I can enable or disable, adjust the volume on the fly, or go to the previous or the next track. It's just fantastic in terms of what Sonos have done over here, and in my opinion is quite class leading. Better still, if you've already invested in the Sonos ecosystem, via this you'll see the different rooms, you can see what's playing, and also, for example, you can adjust in terms of dialing in terms of the different rooms available. It is again a fantastic user experience, and one that I can't stress enough is class leading. Now, better still, in terms of the system setup, you can adjust certain settings. For example, you can add different products to your rooms, or for example, if you go into the room, you can then see the certain products. So for example, here we've got the Ray, and you can easily set up the sub or the surrounds by just tapping the icons. Here you do also have an EQ where you can have a personalized EQ. In my case, I've taken 2 notches off the bass and 2 notches added to the treble, and I've enabled loudness. Note, if you do have an iOS device, you do also have the True Play functionality, and one that allows you to calibrate to your room's acoustics. Alas, I do not have that functionality because I'm on Android. Now here you do also have a variety of different TV functions, and you've also have the ability to enable and disable the status lights and these touch controls. Now elsewhere, I should point out that the Ray does not have any built-in mics, and as such does not natively support Amazon Alexa nor Google Assistant. However, it does built into the ecosystem, and therefore if you do have a third-party device, you can still control the Ray from afar via your voice only. So with all of its features out of the way, let's get on to the all-important sound demo. Now, I do appreciate it's not going to be ideal because it's over YouTube using my microphone, but it'll just give you a sort of taster. First off, we'll be going on to a music demo whereby I'll be using Priya J's track, which is titled Falling, and then I'll be also going to a piece to camera whereby I'll be presenting the Suzuki A-Cross on Totally EV. Now, I can't really talk about reliability, but I can talk about the overall efficiency and what you're actually getting for the price. And here, the Suzuki A-Cross costs around £46,500. So what does that money get you? Well, here the Suzuki A-Cross is actually quite intriguing. See, it not only has the ability to be plugged in, but also has self-charging capabilities. Now, with the audio demo out of the way, I should just reiterate that this is a 2.0 channel configuration soundbar. Of course, it can be upgraded, as I did mention before, to a 2.1, 4.1 or 4.0 channel configuration via Sonos' other products. But here we'll be solely concentrating on the standalone Ray. Here it does house 4 drivers, which therefore has 4 Class D amplifiers, and here you've got 2 forward-facing tweeters, 2 forward-facing mid-woofers, and a passive bass reflex system. Now, what does the combination lead to? Well, in terms of my subjective opinion, I feel that the sub-bass tones are cut short, and it's almost no surprise because it doesn't have a dedicated subwoofer that comes bundled at this price point. In comparison, its competitors, for example the likes of JBL or Creative, which offer a bundled subwoofer at the same price, means that they can deliver a much more hearty low-end response. And therefore, if you're watching certain films, you're going to get that little bit of rumble, or indeed if you're listening to more challenging R&B, D&B, or let's say EDM tracks, you're going to get a little bit more of the heartfelt sort of bass line sound, which ultimately means that it's one of its downfalls. On the flip side, however, the mid-bass tones are actually really pronounced. So much so that I took 2 notches off the bass EQ when I was listening back to the soundbar in front of my television, and I took 6 notches off the bass EQ and turned off loudness when I was using it in terms of desktop setup. Ultimately here, it really depends on in terms of your own room's acoustics, but it's great to see that Sonos have included a bass EQ, so for you to tailor it to your own preference. Now, despite the heavy emphasis on the mid-bass tones, I was actually taken back by the overall mid-range accuracy and forward nature. See, for example, when I was listening back to Priya J's vocals, or when I was listening back to myself presenting the Suzuki A-Cross on Totally EV, the vocals just came across at the forefront, which isn't the same that could be said about the JBL or Creative soundbars that I just referenced that have a very much V-shaped and pushed back sound signature when it comes to the mid-range tones. Now, it should also be considered, however, if you do want the best sort of vocal reproductions, you should also consider the Samsung S61A or S60A, because here in an all-in-one soundbar at this price point, I think the Samsung still reigns supreme. Now, as for the highs, I had no complaints whatsoever with the Sonos Ray, because here it extends really well and produces that sort of excitement you want at the top end. It didn't feel too sibilant or harsh either. Of course, you can EQ this via the Treble EQ, and therefore you can add even more than I did and make it even more, well, accentuated. But I think you'll find that be taken away from the overall sound frequencies, and also will take away from the overall smooth sort of nature that the soundbar reproduces. And finally, we get onto its soundstage, and here I will say that the Sonos Ray's instrument separation is excellent and therefore kept me quite engaged when I was listening back to my favourite tracks. However, the overall width and depth left me a little bit, well, disappointed. Its lackluster performance due to the omission of upward or sideward firing drivers and its compact nature meant that it can't quite compete with other soundbar units out there, be it all-in-one ones or the ones that also include a subwoofer. Now, I should also mention in terms of my gaming experience, because I'm a PC gamer and therefore meant I was able to plug in the soundbar via my PC, and here I was able to output 24-bit 48, and here I felt that the overall gaming experience was okay, but in comparison to other soundbar units out there from the likes of Razer or Creative, it couldn't quite compete, be it in terms of the overall sound reproduction or, for example, the overall features that its competitors offer, from software integration, fancy RGB lights, or even useful inputs and outputs, such as, for example, a microphone input or a USB input, or, for example, a headphone output for those late night gaming sessions. Now, of course, this is me concentrating on PC gaming, and here if you are going to be gaming in your living room setup, so for example, if you're a console gamer, here yet again some of the soundbar solutions out there on the market, such as the ones, for example, from Samsung, Creative, or for example the likes from JBL, will do a better job in terms of the overall soundstage reproduction and will keep you more engaged when you're playing any sort of game. So with all of that in mind, it brings me on to my verdict, and even though I've been quite critical about the Sonos Ray, I still do think it's a great sounding soundbar and a great alternative for those people looking to invest into the Sonos ecosystem, be it if you have or haven't already. But there are some other alternatives that you should consider, and they'll be down in the description below for your consideration. These are coming from personal recommendations from myself, who's reviewed over 500 audio-related devices. Now, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts on the Sonos Ray down in the comments section below as to what you make of it, what you think in terms of its sound, its design, or indeed in terms of its features or its missing features. And of course, it goes without saying that if you like this independent review, definitely do drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification, all of which are greatly appreciated and allows me continuing doing honest reviews like this one. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.